Hello, I'm Matthew Sweet, and you're listening to the 80s Archive podcast.
Welcome to another edition of the 80s Archive podcast. This week I am delighted to be joined by an award-winning journalist, writer and presenter. The best way to describe him would be a cultural historian. Having also written many Doctor Who audio dramas, written books about the world of British cinema, his love certainly shines through in anything he does. A consummate professional all round and one of our true archivists, keeping the world of cinema and television of yesteryear alive. Please welcome to the show, Mr. Matthew Sweet. Good evening, sir. How are you?
Well, hello. Consummate professional. I always thought that was like a kind of code for being a monster. That he was a consummate professional and loved by all who knew him. That's like something when you hear that in obits, that means they were I won't say the word.
Should we stick with it?
Well, you can withdraw it at the end if you want.
I mean it in the literal sense. I mean it in the literal sense. Matthew, I'm over the moon to have you on the show. I've been following your work for some years now. Got some of your books, obviously seen your extras on the Doctor Who Blu-ray sets and DVDs of the past. I'm just super psyched to have you here. It's a real treat. And we just want to try and paint a picture of what the 1980s meant to you.
Yeah.
Of course, there'll be some questioning either side of that. So starting right at the top, tell us about your origin story. Where did you grow up? Where did you come from?
Well, I grew up in Hull. I was born in Hull in the very last days of the 60s. So I have a foot in that decade. We moved around quite a lot, really. So it was in Hull for a bit. It was in Southport for a bit, very short amount of time, but mainly in Hull. And then I spent my teens in Manchester, or in Stockport, really, or really in Cheadle, or really actually in Cheadle-Hulme.
Oh, okay. In terms of TV and film, what was blaring out at you on the box? What were your things that were sticking with you?
My sister was born when I was 2, and I can remember watching an episode of Skippy the Bush Kangaroo where a baby in a carry-cot fell into a river and got swept away. And I can remember watching that and crying about it and feeling really worried. And then my mum asking me, "Oh, what's the matter? What's the matter?" And I sort of didn't want to say, but it was because there was this baby in peril in a stream, or probably a raging Australian a river of some sort. But yeah, I mean, Doctor Who, obviously. Oliver Postgate was very important to me. Yeah, Mary Mungo Midge and Play School and stuff like that.
I take umbrage with Mary Mungo and Midge because I kind of feel as though, why was she left alone in this flat, in this high-rise block of flats with no parental supervision?
Yeah, I never really thought of that. But I like the fact that she did live in a tower block because my granddad lived in a tower block exactly like that on the Orchard Park estate in Hull. And so the tower block seemed a very glamorous thing to me. I can remember, going when I used to go round to his, it seemed like a slightly space age environment. It had its own laundry, like on the 13th floor, the 18th floor. Everything was fitted. Seemed a really futuristic sort of environment. One of those Radburn towers, all completely gone now, on the very fringes of Hull. So from his window, you could see like the kind of the travellers' encampments that were on the kind of the frowsty edges of Hull, the sort of place where you still see them really, like horses tethered on roundabouts and that kind of thing, the very edge of the city.
And in terms of your parents, were they sort of into the arts and so forth, or is that where you kind of got your love of TV from?
My dad was the first person in the family to go have higher education of any sort, and he got a scholarship to go to the Royal College of Art in the 60s.
Wow.
My mum was an art student. She did they met at Hull. They met at Hull College of Art, where my dad ended up teaching in the end. Moved back there after, I think, 2 years. And then went to uni. And then, of course, he went to uni. And then 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 he doing his degree in London in the 60s. We had books. We had the things I remember the most are things like my mum had a run of the novels of Thomas Hardy that were in these very 70s covers that I think must have been inspired by, either the film with Julie Christie of Far From the Madding Crowd or of the TV versions in the early 70s. But they really stick in my mind because they were almost like Laura Ashley version of the 19th century. So stuff like that. And we had a Dan set record player with, my mum's Beatles and Joan Baez LPs. We didn't really go out to cultural things much. We went to things like the Young Musician of the Year when that was at the Royal Northern College of Music when we moved to Manchester. But my dad's a painter. He still is. So my childhood had the smell of turps about it, really. And the house was full of these really quite big abstract canvases that he worked on and still does. That's what my home here in London is full of them. So yeah, I was the child of art 60s art students, really.
Open fire! All weapons! Dispatch War Rocket Ajax to bring back his body.
Now, I've got an interesting tale about this particular.
Oh yeah, go on.
I was asked to be in a Queen tribute band.
Yeah.
For one night only. And they said, John, we're going to do Flash. And I went, oh, right, okay.
Yeah.
What could I do on that? He said, we want you to do the Brian Blessed talking bits.
Oh, yes.
And I went, okay, fine. So there I was.
You didn't do Ornella Muti.
No. That not all the Dispatch War Rocket Ajax. And so there I was in front of 200 people pretending to be Brian Blessed, which was wonderful. Okay. Matthew, why did you choose that particular record?
Well, I owned it. I got it as a present. So I had the album, and I didn't have too many of those. I think really it had this, the Muppet Show album, and Genesis of the Daleks, and the Doctor Who sound effects LP. They were the only ones I owned at the age of 10 or 11. And that film is just incredible. It was the first film I went to see twice. I had the single as well. I had the single, and then I got the album. And it's one of those things that takes me back. I saw it twice, and the second time wasn't really on a second run, but it was at the end of its run. So it was really scratchy. So it's one of the first times where I remember actually noticing film as a sort of chemical medium, really, because the final scenes with the Hawkmen in were so scratched and messed up. But I think it's a wonderful film. I love the Buster Crabbe 30s and 40s serials that were shown on Saturday on holiday TV in those days. And it's a film that's really stayed with me. And it's so lurid and it's so colourful and it's so pervy, really, as well. I think this is another reason why it had such a strong effect upon me. That was an impressionable age.
It's a pantomime of a film, isn't it? Really?
Well, I think it's like what Mike Hodges did. I mean, it was never a job that he chose. He took it up from Nicholas Rowe was supposed to direct it. So Mike was never really. I got to know him quite well at the end of his life, and so this is another reason why it's both it and the film and him are very dear to me. But it was not a job he really wanted. He wasn't very au fait with the material, and he was sort of embarrassed about it for a while. But later he got to love it, I think, or he got to like it. I remember sitting with him at an open air screening of Flash Gordon in Bristol a few years ago, free outdoor one. And when we got to the scene where Brian Blessed and Timothy Dalton pair up together and they say, we've got to get together and fight Ming. There were these two drunk Ulstermen who got to their feet and put their fists in the air and shouted, "No surrender!" It's just a profoundly odd film for children. I took my own kids to it. And I suppose they were about the same age as I was when I saw it. And when we came out of the cinema, they said, "Dad, why have you taken us to a porn film?" And it is it's really sleazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think that's part of the joy of it.
And of course, you must own the 4K Studio Canal box set of it.
I do. Yes. We all thought we'd have more shelf space, but now you can only buy films the films you really like are now only come in cupboard-sized boxes full of
Huge. Yeah.
postcards.
There's a lot of guff, for want of a better phrase, in these box sets that, I'll be honest with you, I never look at. You know, as a huge advocate as I am for physical media, and I'll always buy the first edition of things, I never look at the posters. I never look at the postcards. I don't. Tell us about your biggest sort of TV or film or even musical influences growing up. Who did you really admire and want to be like?
Who did I want to be like? I think the people I wanted to be like were, I suppose, people like David Attenborough and James Burke. James Burke was a big hero of mine. And his series Connections and The Day the Universe Changed were like, just seemed so dazzlingly clever. It became a bit sent up in later years. And in fact, I think what those series were so expensive that the BBC didn't let him make any more after a certain point. And it became a kind of running joke, so that, like, I remember on one of Spike Milligan's Q series, there was a send up of, I think, both Attenborough and Burke, where Spike Milligan was like saying things like, "Could the answer be found here on a beach in the Bahamas?" No. And then he walked off to some, because James Burke, wherever he was, always gadding about the world to tell us about some amazing connection between something that happened in the 14th century and something that happened on the Apollo missions, something like that. And he was so, I don't know, such a great communicator. And doing a really kind of smart, ideas-based primetime telly, which I feel very nostalgic for, because it's sort of dead now. There's nothing like that on TV anymore. And he sort of opened up my mind a bit, I think. And I often go back to that series. I mean, I'm making a series for Radio 4 at the moment called What Happened to Progress? And we're interviewing like some pretty heavyweight public intellectuals for it. And I keep thinking back to Piece to Camera that James Burke did. I think it's the last episode of The Day the Universe Changed, where he's standing on a mountainside in Tibet, of course, and he's essentially talking about what will happen when the internet arrives, and about, instantaneous communication between people and how that might change democracy. And what's interesting about it is that he isn't, it's not a kind of wide-eyed celebration about it. He's full of doubt about it, really. So it seems very prophetic to me. So I think it was figures like that who I really wanted to be like, I think.
Did Arthur C. Clarke feature for you at all in that realm?
Well, sort of, but you see, Arthur C. Clarke wasn't serious enough. Arthur C. Clarke was sort of I mean, he lived on a beach, didn't he, in Sri Lanka? But so although I enjoyed Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World, I knew it was like unserious. And so it was just like, I was a subscriber to the unexplained part work as well. So I knew that belonged to a less serious world, where it was kind of fun, but probably all those people were just lying. Making up these stories about things they'd seen in the woods or stones moving across the desert on their own. It was kind of unconvincing, but exciting. I watched it like fiction, I watched it like Doctor Who. But that made Clarke seem a kind of a sillier sort of figure than Burke or Attenborough, who were like kind of teachers, really, whereas he was leading you on, I think, really. And it's odd because he was in a way, in some ways, he wasn't a very humorous person, was he, Arthur C. Clarke?
No.
But so yeah, they were a laugh, but they were not to be taken seriously, and they were on ITV as well, which probably made them seem less serious.
Favorite TV show, something that you ran home from school to watch, or even in your adult life you ran home from work to watch. What would that be? Well,
that would have to be Doctor Who, though running home from school makes me think of a terrible moment when I suppose I would have been about, 8 or 9, and I saw in the listings in the paper, I thought I saw that they were showing You Only Live Twice on a weekday afternoon. And I told my friends at school about this. They were a bit disbelieving about it, but I said, no, I saw it there. I saw it there. And so we did all run home to watch it. And of course, it wasn't that. It was a repeat of the sitcom You're Only Young Twice with Pat Coombs and Peggy Mount. So I wasn't that popular.
Not the Bond girls you want, really.
Having made everybody run home for that.
Yeah, I think my mother told me a story of the late 60s or maybe early 70s where they had got tickets to see The Magnificent Seven, but they ended up seeing The Magnificent Seven Deadly Sins.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Which is a dreadful film with Spike Milligan, isn't it?
Yes. Or it's like when in The Good Life, when they think they're being interviewed in The Observer and it turns out to be the Ox and Buck Observer.
So going on to Doctor Who, I don't want to make this a Doctor Who podcast, but it is my favourite programme of all time. There's no denying it. Favourite story for me, Resurrection of the Daleks, 1984.
Yeah.
Tell us about your memories of Who, but also tell us about 80s Who, because lots of people are a bit indifferent to that, aren't they?
My sense of Doctor Who in the 80s is that its palette changed a lot. It had been a kind of a green and red programme. And then in the 80s, it became a sort of pastel program, and it looked like, at its best, the kind of video you might see on Top of the Pops. I suppose that when Tom Baker's last season happened, that's the point at which, I was 10 then, but I remember trying to treat it with a certain kind of seriousness. I think that it was the point at which I acquired a cassette recorder. So it was the first time I could tape the soundtracks. So I knew it a lot better. I think the repeats of City of Death and Destiny of the Daleks actually were the first time I was able to do that. But it meant I kind of knew those episodes a lot better. And even at that age, I remember thinking how austere and serious they seemed. And how full of how scientific they were. Of course, it's as much gobbledygook as anything else, really. I think, but it seems so serious. So my thoughts about it are all to do with that. The desperate attempt to preserve it. Would the cassette recorder work, or would it, in those horrible moments, sometimes it just mangled or didn't work? Or I remember if it went wrong, if you were lucky, you could retune to BBC Wales the following day, and you could have a second go, but it was a bit staticky. I mean, it had always been an important part of my life, and I can't really remember life before Doctor Who, or a time when I wasn't. It didn't take up quite a lot of the inside of my head, really. But I think in the 80s, that was the moment when I joined the Doctor Who Appreciation Society, and it seemed very exciting to be able to get story titles in advance and that kind of thing. And also I remember, when it was engulfed in crisis and when it kind of lost lost a bit of its cultural cachet. It was something that you had to defend somehow. And I remember watching the last season. That it was in my first year at university. I didn't have a TV in my room, so I had to watch it in the junior common room at my college, and that was quite lonely. Nobody else wanted to see it. It's the McCoys that my kids respond to the most. Their favourite story used to be Delta and the Bannermen, and I think Delta and the Bannermen, although I was possibly a bit nonplussed by it at the time because it seemed to have things in it that broke the rules, like singing, for instance. Now I love it, and I also think it's really like a model for New Who as well. I think there are Delta and the Bannermen you could do now. I think it's one of the few you could just, you kind of toughen it up slightly. But Delta and the Bannermen would fit very happily into Russell T Davies era Doctor Who. I think
it's quite a brutal story, and people see it as being quite colourful and lots of pops and bangs and whistles and very much light-hearted. It's not. It's actually quite grim. I mean, the character that Don Henderson plays is vile. It's absolutely vile.
Also extremely fast, and I think that one of the things that you really notice when you look at TV from the 80s, I think we're going through a period like this now, is how slow it is. Like an episode of Howard's Way It's like so slow, long scenes where not very much happens.
I have the box set at the moment, and
Doctor Who from that period is cut like a movie. It's so fast. I think from that point of view, it looks it has a kind of velocity about it that a lot of TV of that era doesn't have.
But it took time to understand the man. Now at least I know him well. Oh, so far, isn't it madness? He can't be mine.
I know him so well, Elaine Page and Barbara Dixon from the musical Chess, 1985. Yeah. Tell us why you chose that, Matthew.
Well, this reflects my working life really, because as a few of these choices do, at the end of the 80s, I was working at the Manchester Opera House selling ice cream. I think Chess is a great musical. It just had the misfortune to appear at the point where the Cold War stopped, so it suddenly seemed rather archaic. Yeah, it just takes me back to that time, really. So I think of, there are certain numbers, like I Cross Over Borders from that show, where if I hear that, I am waiting to open those doors with a tray of strawberry, chocolate and vanilla ice cream around my neck, at the point where, pleasingly for somebody who is as bad at maths as me, they were all 50p each, so the sums were not hard. When they went up to 55p, terrible,
blow my mind.
Yeah. So it takes me back to that rather happy time, really, when I was kind of between school and university, had a year out, and I was working there. All sorts of things. Hello, Dolly with Dora Bryan. I feel I still know most of the moves for that. And of course, Doctor Who: The Ultimate Adventure with John Pertwee. I've got photographs somewhere of John Pertwee's line reminders that he wrote on the console. I remember the little son of the woman who had the kiosk in the front she was called Doreen, and she sold a lot of Newberry fruit. And I remember walking from the front of house area into the backstage area to go out through the stage door with her and her son. And her son ran off and disappeared. And we thought, where's he gone? And he came back. And he'd run into John Pertwee's dressing room. And this little boy came out and he said, Granny, I've just seen Wurzel Gummidge in his knickers.
Oh, that's brilliant. That is brilliant. Matthew, this is a question that we ask every single one of our guests, and I'm hoping you're not going to let me down. I've got a good feeling about you. Okay. So, Mr. Matthew Sweet, do you have a ghost story?
A little bit of one, yes. Robin Hood's Bay, 1978, I think. I remember it was the night that episode 1 of The Invisible Enemy was repeated, because I remember that's what happened directly after it. Walking down, if you know Robin Hood's Bay, it's got lots of tiny, narrow little streets. All the houses are very crammed together. So as you go down to the Esplanade, there's all of these streets that run parallel with the sea, but they're just like alleyways, really. And I remember going down one of these alleyways and seeing in a window of a house a little mirror. And I looked in the mirror and I saw a man, almost like a kind of central casting fisherman, a man sitting in a chair, reading a book, wearing a woolly hat. And the reflection appeared to be, I couldn't work out where the reflection was coming from. So he didn't seem to be inside the house, though he must have been. And the angle of the thing was really weird. It's like he should have been behind me, but he wasn't.
Don't walk away. And you and I'll be dancing in the cool night air. Oh, what an atmosphere. I love a party with a happy atmosphere.
Atmosphere, Joy Division. Atmosphere, Russ Abbott. Two stalwarts of British 80s-ness.
Caused great confusion. I've chosen to segue these together to memorialize this confusion, because not smash hits, but the Number One magazine, if you remember that, used to print kind of the top 100, I think, and it caused great consternation at school. This because it didn't come straight in at number one. Russ Abbott's Atmosphere. It must have bubbled under somewhere else, and we just saw it in this magazine, Atmosphere, Russ Abbott, and we thought he cannot have done a cover version of a Joy Division record, can he? And indeed, he hadn't. I remember interviewing him a long time ago now when I was a child journalist, and I remember going to interview him in his dressing room, and him telling me about his hair transplant, because he'd had one of the first ever hair transplants in the country, I think. Well, I don't know whether he had it in Atmosphere or whether perhaps he was in that he was thin on top, or he may even have worn a toupee. We can go back to the video and check, I guess. But he was unhappy about the hair transplant. And I remember he put his head down and he asked me to feel the top of his head. And he said, feel that. It's like a solitaire board. And you could indeed feel, because it was like, I mean, they're very sophisticated now. But in those days, a hair transplant, it was like a quincunx or an arrangement of 9 or 12 bits in which hair had been stapled into his head almost. So like a doll's hair. It sprouted up from these different points. It wasn't like gently rolling follicles. It came up. You could sort of feel where it had been drilled in or whatever they did with it. So I've always been very well disposed towards Russ Abbott. He was a good interviewee, one of those people who will, very unguarded and funny.
So tell us what did the 1980s as a vast unit mean to you?
Well, a lot of things, really. I was totally convinced that I would be incinerated at some point in the 80s. I saw Peter Watkins' The War Game when I was about 13, I think. So I was a member of Youth CND when I was young, and was kind of convinced that, after watching that and Threads, that my future, if I had one, would be to be kind of trading rat meat in the ruins of Stockport. So that's very strong. I remember going later, actually, but not that much later, to the bunker where my bit of the world would have been administered. It's somewhere near Crewe. And it's a bit like one of those things, like in Blake 7 or Doctor Who, when there's a big base, but it's underground and there's just like a kind of lid in a field.
Yeah.
But that's what this was like. And I remember there was this room that had all these desks in with Toblerone-shaped signs on them to show what areas of responsibility in the post-apocalyptic world various people would be required to follow. And one of them was Inland Revenue. But Inland Revenue.
They'll get you.
You would pay them in rats, I suppose. Pay them in rats. So that was important. But there was also, in my late teens, I was in Manchester. So although I wasn't down the Hacienda every night, I did go there. And all that felt very, very it felt a good place to be. We knew it was zeitgeisty, and we kind of felt sort of quite lucky to be there at a moment when it all blossomed. People like Tony Wilson were very much on my radar. You would see him everywhere you went. Morrissey you would see on the street in Manchester. Julie Goodyear, of course. Coronation Street seemed to be in its imperial period in the 80s. So those things culturally. And then, yes, school. So, I mean, I think they're the things I would pick out, really.
And you're of an interesting bracket as well, because you were a child in the 80s when it started and a grown-up when it ended.
Yes, indeed, yeah.
So, Matthew, the network DVD box set 93 discs of Crossroads and your live watch-alongs. Tell us what that was like, and how are you still here?
And I did a program for Radio 3 about Crossroads, and I was going to write about it for the paper. So I thought, well, what would happen to the human mind if you actually did watch however many episodes it was? I cannot remember now. I decided that I would try and make, like at the end of Genesis of the Daleks, where, out of not evil, some good must come. But I thought there would be some way to make this a more virtuous process, or make something come out of it. So I decided I would watch these episodes and be sponsored to do it for a homeless charity in Birmingham. And I hope he won't mind me saying this, but that Russell T Davies started me off with £1,000. I thought, well, I've got to do it now.
Yeah.
And the money just kept coming in.
Wow.
And I kept watching, and my mind was slowly being broken by this process. The box set I came to see was a bit like, it made me think of the hero of the decadent novel Arabor by J.K. Huysman's classic 1890s bit of decadence. He does something kind of beautiful and grotesque in that book. He takes a live tortoise and he studs it with rubies, and the tortoise dies, but it's very beautiful. And the Crossroads Noel Gordon box set is like that tortoise. It's beautiful, but it's also kind of, it's against nature. That's what Arabor means. Watching a soap opera as a box set, I think you dabble with the forces of the universe. And I almost felt like I was trapped in time somehow. And I still feel, as I speak about it, I still feel oppressed by the idea. And while I was doing this rewatch, I had a frozen shoulder, some problem like that. So I had some difficulty sleeping. And then I suddenly realized I'd lost the ability to sleep. I just couldn't sleep. And I thought, well, I know, I'll just bore myself into unconsciousness by watching Crossroads. But it had the opposite effect. And I began to feel like I had entered this zone of what I'll call radical banality, where the plainness and brownness and drabness of Crossroads took over my mind, really. The aluminium teapots, the Draylon upholstery, the curtains moving, not really in the wind, because there is no wind, rain being poured onto featureless chalet windows. And it's also, I think, a bit like the kind of place Sapphire and Steel would go. Because if you watch it, it's so deep in its past that they never bothered to explain it, really. Mm-hmm. But Noel Gordon lives in this sort of 18th century drawing room that's a bit like the base in the Ice Warriors. But you walk through the door and suddenly you're in this 60s, this 60s flat roof building with, with pine walls. And it's because the story of Crossroads is that this is an old house, and they built the motorway, and rather than moving out and accepting kind of money from the council to move out, or from whoever built the motorway, she decides to open a motel, her and her sister at that point in the story. So that's why you walk from the 18th century into the 20th. I did sort of suffer from terrible insomnia, and I couldn't sleep. And I did end up in the acute ward of Lewisham Hospital, literally sort of crying and begging for some Jacqueline Suzanne strength sleeping pills. And I can remember, he must have thought I was really crazy, but I can remember I did say to the doctor, the duty GP there, Christmas this was, I'd taken all kinds of prescription drugs to sort it out, and it was having the opposite effect. And I remember saying to the GP, telling him about Doris Lessing's attempt to simulate the effects of mental illness by not eating or drinking for like 48 hours. And, pretty soon you do start to lose your mind. And I felt I'd entered that. It wasn't hallucinating or anything, but I felt I couldn't sleep. I felt profoundly kind kind of anxious and a bit desperate. I had no idea what to do with myself. I felt I was like I'd done some terrible experiment on myself with a Crossroads box set. So literally, he did give me those kind of, I can't remember what they're called now, but like 70s style sleeping pills.
Wow.
And I just knocked myself out. And I was sort of okay after a few days. But now when I hear the Crossroads theme, I do imagine a sort of the endless loop of it is beautiful. It's a nice tune, but it does also represent a kind of void from which you might never escape, because it just goes, it's just a loop.
The Only Way Is Up, 1988, Yaz and the Plastic Population. Tell us why you chose that record.
Well, this is just that this is like a night out in Manchester in 1988. Going to a club that's probably long gone now. Yeah, clocking off after at the Opera House, changing from the rather awful like plastic Eton collar type thing that they used to make us all wear with a green ribbon tie, leaving that behind in the changing room and going out on the town into the late hours. Yeah, dancing to this, and then afterwards going to because the Opera House had these sort of deals with other places in Manchester that I think were to do with the oh god, I've forgotten his name now. The guy who owned it, who also was part of the Manchester Olympic bid. Anyway, for some reason we had access to the Manchester Evening News press club, so that once the club had closed, you could go down the road like at 4 o'clock in the morning and go to this absolutely classic. It looked like a working men's club, but it was like the after hours club for print workers and journalists at the Manchester Evening News, and it was of course totally plastered with signed photos of Coronation Street stars, and it had just the kind of the gold strip fly excluder curtain that you would expect, and it had Cornish pasties under a lamp. And it was like where you went at the end of a long night with Yaz still ringing in your ears.
Jago and Lightfoot, you got to write some of those wonderful spin-off episodes for the Big Finish Doctor Who range. For those who are not familiar with Jago and Lightfoot, they were characters in the 1977 story, The Talons of Wen Chiang.
Which is really my favourite one.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay. That's your favourite Doctor Who story
I
ever?
would say so, because it's just so there's just so much going on in it, and there's so much to kind of debate about it as well. It's kind of it's a real relic of a moment, isn't it? When when Christopher Lee was playing Fu Manchu in the cinema, John Bennett's sort of doing the same thing, isn't he? But it's my period, I'm a Victorianist, so I can I feel it's like a text I can handle, really. And it also is just so, Holmes's writing is so, the language is so delicious. And there's so much. That's why Jago and Lightfoot was possible, because, that conversation between, they don't really talk that much.
No.
But it's the beginning of a conversation that between Jago and Lightfoot that proved, very kind of extendable. It was only really Trevor's death that stopped it.
You're a huge advocate for British films, British movies. Okay, you've written several books on the subject. What would you say is your favourite British or favourite film in general?
Well, I think the British film I would like to pick out when I get asked this question is Cavalcanti's Went the Day Well. Which is set in an English village. I don't think it's really a big spoiler, is it, to say that it's set in a wartime village and a platoon of soldiers arrives to make camp there and needs to be accommodated there, and they are not quite what they seem.
Oh, it's just so... I don't know how to describe it. Heartwarming, heart-wrenching, brutal in some places, especially when the Home Guard get gunned down.
Yes.
At the side of the road in broad daylight.
Yeah.
And how
one of the first shots ever done by Dougie Slocum.
Is it? Okay.
Cinematographer, yeah. He came straight off he'd just been shooting on the Atlantic convoys, and he came in to do some, I think it was second unit work at first on Went the Day Well, and those shots of the Home Guard being gunned down are I think the first, very, very early for him in fiction filmmaking. He'd been a documentary maker before that.
And they kind of get suspicious. Their final nail in the coffin of their suspicions is when they're all playing cards in the pub or something, and one of them writes down a number but uses an international 7.
That's right, a 7 with a stroke through it.
Yeah.
I go back to that period quite a lot now, partly because of working on Bookish, the series that Mark Gatiss and I make. Clues like that are now very important to us. Continental 7s.
There's a particular scene that always gets me, actually, and it's Thora Hird and her friend firing out of the window, and giving it their all. And doesn't one of them? It's been a long time since I've seen it. One of them gets gunned down, and the school. Oh, I've just remembered as well. The school mistress, the quite large lady, she stops a grenade.
Mari Law, yes, she saves the kids by throwing herself on the grenade. Oh, it's extraordinary. I can't see it without feeling very, very emotional. I've seen it projected many times.
There's not many films that have broken me. I'm in the midst of trying to compile my list of my top 1,000 films of all time.
Wow.
Yeah, and I'm on 950 something at the moment. Hardcore Uproar Together. Never heard it before in my life before this program. Matthew, tell us why you chose that record.
Well, we've chosen. We're going to end on a sad note here. The song was a big hit. It's one of it comes from the end of Factory Records, really, before it went bust. And it was used a lot it was picked up a lot and used on TV. It was on Match of the Day a lot. But it's the work of a school friend of mine called John Donaghy. And he was a classmate of mine, not a very, very close friend, but, knew him pretty well. And he and his girlfriend were sort of the coolest people in the school, really. Sort of in a kind of that effortless way you only have like when you're a kid, I think. And it was his first record, and it was a big hit, and we were all terribly proud of him. And he and his girlfriend were killed in a road accident in Ibiza in 1991. I had this cassette and we played it all the time because it was just so exciting to know somebody, to have a school friend of yours who was like, they weren't like pop stars because they were sort of anonymous in the way that club acts always were. I don't think they were ever on Top of the Pops. I didn't have a telly at that time because it was at university, so maybe they were on Top of the Pops, but I don't think so. They were slightly secretive in a kind of Daft Punk sort of way. So to me, their deaths are really like the end of where the 80s end for me. So it's a sad story. They were both 20, and it's, to me, it's like the thing that most brings back that era, that Hacienda era, and that kind of acid, I suppose, era, and my teenage years.
Tell us about Bookish, and tell us about how the collaboration with Mark Gatiss came along.
It's Mark's creation, Mark's idea. And he was at the Radio Times covers party where he met the producers of the show, Walter and Joe of Eagle Eye. Walter, if you know Walter Presents, that is Walter.
Right.
And they said, would you be interested in doing a detective show? And Mark said, "Well, I happen to have a script." And I think he got maybe half written, or maybe he wrote maybe the first episode. Sometimes these things take years. This didn't. It really didn't. They brought me in to co-write it. And that was all while that first year of production was while Mark was doing Motive in the Queue as well, his Gielgud play. So he's very, very busy. We have a great time doing it. We make it in Belgium mainly. The interiors, right. All the studio stuff is in Belgium. It's shooting right now. We're in the middle of the second series, or halfway through the second filming block of the second series. And then next year we will be going to a séance. We will be going to a tailor shop somewhere off Savile Row, and we'll be going to a German castle at Christmas. And that's what's being shot right now, actually. Some lovely guest stars. I'm so pleased that people have responded to it and seem to like it so much. What can I say? It's a joy.
It has a classic British drama feel to it. It doesn't have the same pacing as things like Line of Duty or, Happy Valley. It's just got this.
Well, it's funny, isn't it? We hope it's funny anyway.
Yeah, but it has got a lovely sort of charm to it, which I think a lot of British drama has been lacking in the last sort of 15, maybe 20 years, and that's what I enjoy about it.
Well, there's not a lot of period stuff around, is there?
But yeah, so when can we expect series 2 of Bookish?
Date to be confirmed, but I mean, as far as I know, next summer is when series 2 will come out. We were June this year. It could be a little bit later because that's just my own calculation from the schedule.
Now, you've told us about Bookish. Last question of the evening. What else is next for Matthew Sweet?
I had another detective novel out this year, which comes out in paperback in January. But I've got a series about progress on Radio 4 at Christmas, which will cheer everybody up. But my big project for next year, I've just delivered, actually, a biography of Barbara Cartland.
Ooh, okay.
Whose archive I've been working on for the past couple of years.
That must have been vast.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And sort of untouched. The house has been kept more or less as it was when she died. So in her lifetime, she occasionally let people look around in it. But it's remained kind of dormant and largely untouched, really, for 25 years now. There's lots of stuff I've read in there that is completely new, and it's an incredible life. And she's such a powerful presence. And I've been writing it where she wrote. I mean, if you know the image of her reclining on her sofa and dictating romantic fiction, all of that environment is still there. I won't sit on the sofa because it feels disrespectful. When I do my work, I sit in the secretary's chair where Miss Savory would have sat once. And so, yeah, I do my... I've read all the letters and as you can imagine, there is a mountain of primary material there, letters and correspondence and, huge dusty cupboards full of manuscripts. And her working environment is the most perfectly preserved working environment of any author, I think. It's like, Down House where Darwin lived. You can get a good sense of how it was when he was there. But that's all reconstructed with Barbara Cartland's house. Nothing has changed since she died. It's like a time capsule.
And how do you whittle all that down? How do you go from sort of that to that? How does that happen?
Well, it's a long life. She lived for almost a century, and she lived for the 20th century. Her life matches that very precisely. So it's really like writing a history of the 20th century. And there's a lot of material to handle. Unfortunately, she left it quite well organized. The scrapbooks are all in order. The archive itself is not a formal archive. So it's like lots of filing cabinets and things in boxes and drawers. And some of it has not survived. Some of it's been lost, and historically there's been a bit of damp in the house, so some material has been lost. Don't know what it was, but lots of very personal things have been kept. So she was, she did posterity good, really, and she hasn't just kept things that present her in a flattering light. There's some quite there's quite difficult material in there about kind of disputes and difficulties that she had. She didn't weed it, is what I'm saying. I think partly because it was somebody else's job. She always had a staff of secretaries, and one of the things that they did was keep the cuttings and keep the correspondence in order. So, like all of her diary, she didn't keep a personal diary, but her business diary and her appointments diaries are all perfectly preserved. So it would be possible to kind of reconstruct her life hour by hour, really, from the 70s onwards. But and they're great fun to read through, because particularly the later ones, because they're like about people who are still around. So the secretary will put, Clive Anderson rang and wants you to go on your show. Do not do it. He is a ghastly man. So the secretaries were quite protective of her, I think.
Well, Matthew, it has been an absolute joy having you on the show. It genuinely has. We're going to be playing out on the Blake 7 theme.
Oh, very good.
Yeah, you've obviously done a bit of work on the Blake 7 Blu-rays which have recently been released. Firstly, just quickly tell us what it was like to do those, and then we'll bid you adieu.
Great. One of the nice things about doing these things at this point, I mean, in Blake 7's case, it's very sad that, we've lost so many of them. Blimey, I would have loved to have interviewed Jackie Pierce. It's so great to be able to talk to these people at length, really, and also for them not to be telling the stories you might hear them tell at a convention, and to be speaking in a slightly more personal way about their life beyond the kind of stuff that it seems appropriate, really, to ask if you stick your hand up in the air in a room full of people. So it's just more intimate, really, and more about how they felt about things, and the stuff that they did that wasn't anything to do with Quarries or Television Centre or stuff like that.
That's what I think you're very good at, actually, is getting these people to come out of their shells. You do tend to make people feel at ease when they're being interviewed by you.
I think it's partly the fortune. It's to do with time, I think. I think these people are perhaps more ready to talk than they might have been 20 years ago. A lot of them are. Some of them are still working, and some of them are not. So they've got a more interesting perspective on life, and there are some. Not everybody's around, so they're slightly freer to speak, really, about maybe things that didn't delight them about their lives on Doctor Who or Blake 7. It's like a nice moment. It's a nice period in people's lives to be asking them to survey their life and say what they thought. I did meet Dudley Simpson once. I met him at a Doctor Who prom, actually. And we were seated in boxes next to each other. We weren't in the same box, but he was at the corner of one and I was at the corner of the next one. And they played his great City of Death theme. I can't remember whether it was the very end of the concert, but there was I think it must have been. But everybody was on their feet and applauding. And I turned round and I realised that I'd been sitting next to him, really, with a kind of a foot gap between us, all the time. So I turned round and I said, "Thank you, Maestro." And we just sort of held hands across the divide of these two boxes for a moment. I shall always remember it. And I think it was such a great moment because Dudley Simpson was a wonderful composer. But really, how often would he have heard his work performed in concert, by an orchestra? So I think it was a really big night for him as well. And it was amazing to be there and just to see his pleasure at hearing his work performed at the Albert Hall and like 6,000 people applauding.